Hello, my name is Ishaan Bhadouria. I am a student of PGP 1820 batch of IIM Tiruchirappalli. So the topic for the day is role of manufacturing in employment generation. Manufacturing sector is critical for the growth of the economy. This is because the sector tends to have a multiplier effect on other sectors in the economy. The manufacturing sector avails raw materials and services from other sectors in the economy and in turn supplies them with finished products, hence stimulating demand for everything from raw materials to intermediate goods. Its area of influence includes sectors like software, health, and transportation. And envisaged in NMP, the manufacturing sector has the potential to provide employment to 100 million people by 2022. However, before this happens, it is important to bring about certain reforms in India's manufacturing and labor sector. Some of the suggestions through which employment can be boosted are: number one, encourage growth in labor intensive industries. Wood, paper products, and textile industries tend to be more labor intensive and require a large workforce, mostly unskilled and no special qualifications required. By focusing on growth in these industries, it is possible to absorb the rising surplus of unskilled workers, particularly in less developed states such as Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, where population is projected to grow at about 8 to 11%. Number 2, focus on MSMEs. MSMEs are critical for the country's economic and social development. They significantly contribute to the GDP, manufacturing output, exports, and employment. In India, MSMEs account for 8% of GDP, 45% of manufacturing output, and 40% of exports. Also, the labor capital ratio is much higher in MSMEs than larger industries. Furthermore, they are considered budding grounds for entrepreneurs, thus encouraging innovation in the country. Hence, it is imperative to focus on the growth in MSMEs that, in turn, would provide a fillip to the manufacturing sector as well as raise the level of employment. Globalization has resulted in several opportunities such as access to supply chains worldwide for SMEs and MSMEs. However, for the sector to reap benefits from the fruits of globalization, it is important to enhance the sector's competitiveness. One of the options for SMEs to improve competitiveness is to adopt the cluster approach, which addresses the general problems of taxation, interest rates, or FDI policies, as well as harmonizes and simplifies procedures, including those related to labor laws. It is also important to increase the availability of bank credit for SME and MSME sector. Even though the sector falls in the category of priority sector lending, only 8% of the total bank credit find its way in this sector. This is minuscule given the fact that almost 95% of the total industrial sector is in the SME and MSME sector. Apart from encouraging bank lending to the sector, it is also important to look at other factors financing in this sector. One way could be the venture capitalist funding for SME and MSME sector, which is practiced in developed countries. Other option can be better regulation and monitoring of microfinance institutions. Currently, most of the microfinance institutions operating in India are either too small to make an impact or are operating with welfare motive. Number 3, labor reforms. A multitude of labor laws exist in India. There are 45 central acts and 16 associated rules that directly deal with labor. In addition, other acts indirectly deal with labor issues. A number of these acts prohibit companies with more than 100 employees from making positions redundant and firing people for any cause other than criminal misconduct. An additional 45 national laws intersecting or derived from the Indian Disputes Act of 1948 and about 200 state laws control the relationship between employees and employers. Rigid labor laws are potentially restricting the country's industrial growth and impacting the very workers they are meant to protect by providing large scale flexible employment. Consequently, companies are increasing resorting to outsourcing and contracting of labors. Hence, it is important to harmonize rules across all of these acts to ensure labor laws are more flexible. Number 4. Improve the quality of training imparted in schools and colleges. Apart from labor reforms, the government is aware of the human capital challenge and has taken major initiatives such as setting up the NSBC to encourage private participation or management in ITIs. However, there is a scope for further initiatives such as to improve the quality of teaching in schools and colleges, to increase provisions for vocational training as well as its attractiveness, and to expand the availability and feasibility of vocational education for school dropouts. Number 5. Labor productivity. Indian companies have made major strides in improving labor productivity in recent years. Over the last decade, the country's labor productivity has increased significantly, but has been lower as compared to China. Although India has lower wage rates than China, productivity adjusted wage rates are equal of the two countries. India needs to make substantial efforts to close its productivity gap and remain competitive on a global level by focusing on lean manufacturing techniques and R&D. To conclude, the ability of the manufacturing sector to absorb excess labor from the agriculture sector and shift the same to the services renders it the driving force in the development process of an economy. While the Indian manufacturing sector has witnessed remarkable growth in the recent years, its contribution to GDP and employment is well below its true potential. The manufacturing sector would need to play a crucial role for India to achieve its goal of employment generation. There is need for strong commitment from the government as well as the industry for the sector to enter the next orbit of high growth and employment generation. Also, there is the need for a robust labor policy which strikes the right balance between the worker right and competitive need of the manufacturing sector. Furthermore, it is important to enhance the productivity of the labor force by enhancing the quality of training. National manufacturing policy achieves its objectives. It has potential to render the manufacturing sector a driving force in India's economic development. Thank you.